Yeah, so thank you all for taking some time out of your we're still on winter break, for taking some time out to get ready for the spring semester. The purpose of our event today, and we have a number of events in January, the purpose of several of them are just kind of these chat sessions where people can ask questions and we can share ideas about how it is we're going to get ready for the spring semester and do the best we can. One of the things we've been talking about for a while is that, conditions are suboptimal and we may be uncomfortable and we have a lot of things going on. Actually, just got an email from a student who I think I've just replied and maybe reading that email as we talk. Yes, but lots of things kind of going on that we have to be flexible about to make sure that we're getting our learning goals accomplished. So one of the things you're going to hear from me a lot, we actually, our talk next week is going to be talking about empathetic course design, is using empathy as kind of a foundation to make sure that when we're teaching, that we're there for our students, because I think we need to be there for them both as people and as scholars. So one of the things that I want to do is I just want to say that we're here for you. That both the Teaching and Learning Center and Global Campus are supporting these efforts, and I'm very excited. I haven't introduced myself. I apologize. Started with that. I'm Don Saucier. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and I'm joined today by some wonderful colleagues from Global Campus, and I'll let Trina and Laura introduce themselves. So Trina.
I'm Trina McCarty, and I'm an instructional designer at Global Campus, and we're here to help you.
And Laura.
I'm Laura Widener, also an instructional designer. And in case you don't know what an instructional designer is, we're basically here to help faculty organize and design and think through their online courses. And instructional designers certainly work in the campus environment as well, but the field has really exploded as online education has exploded. So we're here to help think through the pedagogy, but also just the layout of an online course and what's sort of the best practices to reach students online.
And one of the things I'll say is the reason that we have instructional designers and the reason we have a teaching and learning center is that you're not alone in this endeavor. You do not have to figure everything else out yourself. There's a lot of support for the kinds of things that you're going to want to be doing. And a lot of the times when I want to do something, someone else has already done that and done it better than I would if I had to kind of ad lib the thing into existence. So using us as resources, I think, is really important. And if Trina or Laura have anything they'd like to say as kind of a starting point, we can do that. But if they don't, we'll open it up for questions and start to chat. So Trina, Laura, anything you'd like to say before this turns into a audience-led chat?
We might put a little plug in. We put a plug in right before the break that we're going to be doing 3-minute Thursday sessions, just little short, quick tips on Thursdays. So in K-State Today, you might check every Thursday morning. We will be adding one of those and sending you out to a short video. Hopefully those will be helpful. And if you find them helpful or know a colleague who might find them helpful, please share.
So Tucker, would you drop that into the chat as a reminder, and also drop into the chat the upcoming events that we have in collaboration with Global Campus this month. Also, we have some talks coming up, my talk next week as LB's talk in a couple of weeks on mind, body, and spirit, if recollection serves. So without further ado, what questions do y'all have? What concerns do y'all have? What issues do you want to discuss? And you can use your voice or you can drop it in the chat, and we're monitoring the chat.
Well, I'm going to say very, very quickly to Trina and Laura, I could use you right now. I'll tell you why. I sent a message to Tucker just a minute ago. I teach an intercession course, and normally it's in Global Campus. I teach it with another person. We do it every time at this time of the year. And we usually have about 25 to 30 students, which is more than what we asked for. But this year, somehow or another, our course ended up being asynchronous after we had set it up as a synchronous course. And the first day of class, or the day before class, a student told us to look at cases and see that it was an asynchronous class. And we scrambled to get that ready in 24 hours because I teach film. And you can't show film on Zoom very well because of the credit. And so it was like amazing. Every day I'm fighting with trying to find options in films and figure out where to tell them to look for them, as well as figure out what I say in a typed version. But what I decided to do was a 20-minute preamble video and then upload that so that it is as close to the way I would teach it in the room. The other part of the dilemma for both Houston and I, because he teaches the music side, is how to have those conversations in response to these two media formats. So it would have been nice to listen or have you all suggest some ways that we could do it. We did the best that we could, but we both think that this might be a venue in the future for the way we run the class rather than to necessarily do it on in person. So we may be back in touch with you about other ways that we can upload or make these resources available to our students, because we might just decide we want to keep it online and asynchronous. So it's good to know that you are there. And if you have any ideas, tell me now. I'm only about halfway through the class.
Intersession is always so tricky, especially the winter intersession, right? Where the university isn't necessarily in session and it's hard to get a hold of people and you don't want to interrupt their break and everything like that. But please, 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 anyone, send us an email, gcid@ksu.edu. Trina and I are terrible about not monitoring our email. We both tend to watch it pretty closely and we'll respond quickly and help out even after hours when we probably shouldn't be, right? But we'd be more than happy to talk that through, La Barbara, and kind of look at options, how you've handled it, how, if we have any other ideas. It's kind of hard to do that abstractly right now. It sounds like you've tackled it in really good ways. You're right. Showing films through Zoom is really doesn't work. And then trying to show students where they can find films can be really tricky. So yeah, we'd be more than happy to meet with you and kind of try and explore other options as well.
Yeah, we've been patting ourselves on the back for at least delivering, because our option was to close it down altogether. And we try to keep some consistency between how he treats the music and how I treat the film, so they don't have as much to navigate differently through both of our platforms. And we're getting ideas from other faculty who taught online as well, and then I'll share it with him and he says, yeah, that's a great idea, I'll do that. I found that in that 20 minutes, because I really want to keep those preambles short, is to show them online where the material is in the files and how to navigate what it is I want them to get out of each file. And therefore, when they go back to decide which film they're going to watch, they have some background information that normally I would just pick the film, the one film, but I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that the students may not have access to the one I really want them to watch. So I try to give them options. And that takes a long time for me to have to search out. Where's another film that does what this one does? I spend my afternoons prepping for the next day, which makes it hard to read their responses before the next day, because they're working in a discussion board, and I should be responding to that. So I think once we have this structured, it will be easier the next time. But
Sure.
having actually prepped it one way, we could have been using that time to prep it this way, and just didn't pay attention, because we didn't request that it was asymptomatic, and somebody fed it in that way and we didn't think to look. So
Shoot.
here we are.
Yeah.
Here we
Technical difficulties of this semester.
Yeah. First thing out of the gate before the first of the year, because our course started on the 28th.
Right.
So right after Christmas, we were right in there working. So, but it's our favorite course. We love it. and we would not give it up no matter what our I won't say that, but no matter what happened, we won't give it up. So, and actually in retirement, since it's global campus, I'm hoping to continue to teach it wherever I am in the world, because if I don't, he can't teach it alone. So it's a reprieve. It's a wonderful thing to figure out how to teach it online and then how to teach it asynchronously. So thanks a
We'd
lot.
love to, we'd love to work with you and talk about like your file system and how we might create modules and do some things to help out your students finding the resources that you need them to find. So yeah, we'd love to work with you.
We actually have modules because we have themes. So we've set it up in our themes and then put our data in 2 files, one for films and one for music. And that way they could go into the theme for that week or that day and split it into which one is mine and which one is his to do. So I think we're trying that, and we said we're going to do not a TVAL, but we're going to do an internal, so Qualtrics for them, because we usually ask after the last day of class, they have to produce a film themselves. So we ask them at the end of class, what did they think? How should we change it? So we are going to do a Qualtrics and ask them questions about the format so that if we do want to use it next year, we're better. We respond. So it sounds like we've got a lot of chat going on. So I want to switch over to
Yes, we
somebody
do.
else. You'll hear from me later in the month. So
So I do want to address Andy's question because it is directly related to films and the challenges of having students watch films. She's saying that she knows that there's a film that she wants students to watch that's on Netflix, but we can't necessarily require students to have access to Netflix. So it's important to, prior to deciding on your films that you're going to use, and sounds like Barbara's had a whole bunch of experience with this lately, is figure out where students could possibly watch that film, right? And you can find things on YouTube that technically are not the copyrighted appropriate way to watch them and all of that. So I wouldn't direct you towards that. But you can also check with the librarians. We do have the digital, I'm going to forget the exact title, but one of our librarians is specifically looking at digital sources. And we do have Swank, which is access to many films, but not all films, and often not, you know, current films. It's more older films. So that can be a good way to have students access that. If you come up with a set of films that are all on Netflix or something like that, you could consider asking students to have that as a course material that you require, right? You require them to purchase a textbooks, that Netflix account for a month or two, that kind of a thing, could be considered that additional course materials area. So, you know, certainly try to find an affordable way for them to get it. You know, I've been able to work with professors and find it on both Netflix and Amazon Prime and stuff like that. So they had different ways to get to it. But yes, that unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, we're following copyright. Zoom will not allow you to show a copyrighted film. It's just black. The students can't see what you're showing. So it does cause some issues.
does Canopy work as well?
Yes, I believe so.
Swank and
Yep.
Canopy are good. What happened, and the reason why I started to do this is one of my students actually asked that question. Asked, can you tell me what the rest of the films will be? Because I'm looking for a platform that might cover as many of them that I will subscribe to. And so it forced me to have to go look at all of the films and find films that I might. And then I just told her where each one was free, which meant I had to look them all up. And also which ones cost $2.99 versus $3.99. And generally Amazon Prime was the best one, but Hulu seemed to work for some. And there were others like that were more obscure, but nevertheless, those were and then YouTube. So it was interesting for me because I buy my own films.
Mhm.
I want a CD or a DVD of each one of them, so that if I am showing it in person, I have a way, rather than online, I have a way to make sure there's nothing that's going to interrupt it. Signal is not going to change it. So I invest in them. And what you said was exactly the way we looked at it. We said we don't have a textbook. So they are paying, I mean, in architecture, you pay $100 for a textbook. And we're nowhere near that price if they looked at each film at $2.99. So we gave them choices rather than say you have to watch them all. We said pick one, and we tried to tell them which one we felt was the most important. So we categorized and did all that we could to make it easier for them to not have an excuse.
Excellent. That sounds like you handled it well.
Okay.
Okay, we've had a bunch of awesome communication in chat that I have not been able to follow. What do we want to tackle next?
So one of the issues, and we've had this question come up a number of times, is how to monitor attendance in Zoom meetings. That was one of the earliest questions we had in the chat. I know it's something that I've kind of struggled with some kind of imperfect systems. So I wondered if you had any expert advice to give us in that regard.
Okay, so a couple of different ideas. You can go and get from Zoom the actual list of attendees to each Zoom session. You kind of have to dig. And so if people want me to, I can share my screen and kind of walk you through how to do that if you'd like. But essentially you have to take a couple of steps back into the reports, and it will give you a list of every student that has, or every person that has attended. Now, you can sometimes have issues if they logged in using a different account. So it's really important to be clear with your students that you need them to log in through their K-State account so that it shows their K-State ID. But sometimes there can be a problem with that. There's also been a problem where sometimes they'll show up duplicatively, like they logged in for 1 minute and then they logged in for 23 minutes or something like that. So you kind of, if you download the report as an Excel file, you can kind of clean that up and see who really was there for the substance of the meeting, right? So that works pretty well. Do you want me to go ahead and demonstrate that? Or maybe that's a Thursday 3-minute tip we do?
I did put, I don't know if it's the link that is the best link, but I did put a link in the chat, Laura. I don't know if
Okay.
that would help people kind of go through.
That could.
It's getting started with reports, and there's an overview. It talks about attendance and that kind of thing.
I do think that would be a wonderful 3-minute thing to kind of put out, because this is a question we've gotten a number of times. I think having that for posterity would be a good idea.
Yeah, it is an extra step. There's also some faculty that require students to put into the chat some sort of message at the very beginning of class. I'm here, hi everyone, anything to just kind of record their name in the chat. Now in doing that, that records that they came at the first part, but it doesn't necessarily document that they stayed the whole time. Right? Whereas the report in Zoom will show the number of minutes that they were in attendance at the session. Any other questions on
similar
that?
kind of thing. Someone asked about chats on Zoom getting recorded in addition to the video audio.
Mm-hmm.
And my recollection is they are. You get this as a text document, but it's not necessarily going to be part of it if you were to say post the Zoom session for your students as an MP4 file, for instance.
Correct. If it's posted as an MP4 file, the chat would not be there. If you recorded to the cloud and then posted a link to that cloud location, then the chat is going to be right there beside the video. Okay. It will not if you have your settings set up to download the chat to you once the session is over, it will only send you the general chat to everyone or any personal chats to you directly. It will not show any chats between students. Those remain private, just in case you have students that are concerned about that privacy piece.
And I don't have all this memorized like Laura does yet, so I went out to the link, and the link is in the chat if anybody wants to save that or reference it later.
I'm one of those visual people. So I like to screenshot all throughout. And I make them turn on their video so that I can see their faces rather than their names. And their names are usually at the bottom of their faces, as yours are. So I find a way to take a picture, even if I have to pull out my camera and shoot it. They know I do that. They all know I have a camera in my hand all the time. So I find ways of making sure they're still there, and at the end, they're still there. I never thought about giving myself a list, but I have a small enough group in a studio where I have 15 students or so that I can put them on gallery, make sure I see everybody, which I'm doing today, and screen shoot. And that gives
So LB, one of the things you said that I want to amplify a little bit is that you talked about kind of making expectations clear to your students about that. So you let them know, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to do it. And students then at that point, if they realize this is part of your course policies that they're not comfortable with, then they can engage in a conversation with you or even take a different class. I think we do need to be careful. There's a lot of privacy kind of things. There's a lot of Zoom takes us into each other's homes potentially. And my laptop won't allow me to change my background to anything else. So you have to see kind of where I am. So letting students know that I expect your video to be on, I think is something important to do right away at the beginning of the semester. And letting them know why, you're having them do this, letting them know what their expectations are and how it's going to support those students' experience and their learning, I think is really important. So I just wanted to amplify that point that you made.
No, and I do. I do.
And this might have been noted, but just like right now, if you're in Zoom and you're in the chat, there's the three little dots next to file. If you click on that, you can save chat right there. So you don't have to be like the host or anything. So your students, anybody can save chat there too.
And so if you're ever, as the professor, wanting to provide the chat, you can do that save chat, or you can have it automatically sent to you, but do make sure you kind of go through and check for any of those personal chats before you provide that to students, right? So you don't want a student saying, text or sending a chat to you directly, oh, sorry, I'm late to class because of XYZ. You would want to delete that before you posted it for the rest of your students.
So someone has just introduced the comment into the chat saying that students can have a bot log in for them through some website. I'd not heard of this. I had heard one of my middle school nieces, she has a video that she plays in her classes that shows her doing this. And she just plays that on a loop during some of her classes. And as her uncle, I said, you need to stop doing that, but she's going to keep doing it. So there are workarounds to some of these kinds of things that we do. Just because they're logged in doesn't mean they're attentive, as someone else had noticed. Is anyone else had any information on these kind of bot services to log in? Has anyone heard of these?
This is Scott Finkeldye.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not as uncommon as you might think. And there are services that do the video that you described that your relative has too, that you go to a site, it helps you create an appropriate video, frames it right, etc. So that is something that students have access to. A lot of my experience has been a lot of those bots require you to pay in the end. They'll let you log in for free once or twice to use it, but then the students have to pay. Not that they're probably, some of them are quite willing to pay for that though. But yeah, expect that trend to grow. To your original point, Don, and the reason I'm jumping in as a tech person is expect that trend to grow, ways to game the system a little bit. We all know that that's part of the way some students think about this. And I will amplify, using your term, Don, I will turn that into a positive and amplify the point that maybe when people say, gosh, what are our kids really learning? Well, they're really learning to adapt, right? And maybe we can figure out some ways to lean into that in our classes. Not lean into the bot bit, obviously, but figure out ways to lean into that somehow and leverage that adaptive attitude for something more positive.
Well, and honestly, the students that are going to cheat are going to find a way. They always
Correct.
will.
We can all
They-
agree.
They will learn new methods, and yeah, I mean, there's only so much we can do, and we need to focus on the ones that are doing it right and are wanting to learn. I mean, that's the most important thing. But that's really a good plug for making sure that your Zoom sessions are focused on active learning and are holding students accountable for responding and being a part of the group. And whether you require cameras on or off or anything like that, there are ways that you can have them interact that show that they are actively engaged. And so someone just sitting there nodding and then not responding in chat or not going into a breakout room or something like that, you'd clearly know that they weren't really there.
I'm wondering about polling. Like, I've always used polling as an anonymous feature, but that could be one way Zoom might be able to help you.
Good conversations about Zoom.
So scrolling
I
back
have
up.
a colleague.
You missed some big ones. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andy,
Go ahead,
please.
Andy.
No, I have a colleague who was telling me that she's at a different institution, but she was telling me that whenever she'll ask a question to a specific student in class, and if there's a beat where they don't respond, she makes a big show of going, okay, they're not responding. And she writes it down so that students are seeing that, like, oh, like this is getting noted when I don't respond. And so having that, like, and I have one of my TAs, I was observing her class last semester, and I think she has just this fabulous trick that she does where when she's getting ready to have students do like breakout rooms or interact, she gives the instructions and then she calls on a random student and she says, can you explain what the instructions are? And so that way she ensures that the students are paying attention to the instructions and that she gets, somebody else aside from her explaining what needs to be done. So the instructions get explained twice. And also the students have that incentive to pay attention because they know that they are probably going to be called on at any point to have to explain what they need to do. And I think that also I noticed her students tend to ask more questions when something isn't clear, so that if they didn't understand, she'll say, okay, like this is what we're doing. Is everyone clear on that? She'll have students saying like, oh, actually, I'm confused about this one part. I didn't understand this, because they know that if they get called out, they're going to have to fess up to that anyway. So I thought that was a really great trick.
I like that.
That's a good
There's a
note.
comment in the chat I wanted to bring up. Barbara Anderson basically said that one of the really cool things about us teaching over Zoom is that other people get to see what we're doing. And one of the really cool things in teaching, over Zoom is seeing a family member walk by, but then kind of listen for a second, and kind of see kind of what's going on there. So it really is kind of a cool outreach piece that we've kind of been given in terms of this opportunity to teach in this modality. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. I thought that was a wonderful statement in the chat.
I just want to go back for a minute to the idea of attendance. And I'm not exactly sure what the medium was. I think it was a Google one, but I was in a private meeting where we were they said, now we're going to send you a link to go out and enter data about yourself that proves to us that you were in that session. And they randomly did it. They would do it at the beginning of the session, but mostly at the end of the session, because we wouldn't get our credit unless we had been there for the whole thing. So I know that there are ways to do it. I find that more complex to have to go somewhere else or enter information that says I was there through the time that you requested this information. but it is a way to check attendance if you were going to try to do that.
I think too, one of the things we can do, and I forget if it was Laura or Trina had said, active learning has to be part of our Zoom experience. If we're doing something valuable as these check-ins, I think it's going to be better than just kind of having, okay, just write your name or just say that you were here, those kind of things. So if you're having them make a contribution, and ideally a low stakes contribution where they're not going to be embarrassed getting the thing wrong, that's something I think we can do pretty easily, and it'll actually invest them in the learning experience and go beyond just kind of taking attendance. So these are the kind of things I might kind of urge us to think about too. And in the chat, I'm seeing that Melissa Wanklin said a comment about whether or not you want to use attendance as part of a grade. And you can, or you don't have to, but there are different things that you can do. But to go back to a point we made earlier, letting your students know what those expectations are, I think are important. I choose to try to be optimistic, and sometimes it's hard. But I think if we kind of realize that most people are trying their best, and if we let them know explicitly what that would look like in our class, I think that hopefully the majority of our students are going to try to do that. So if we say that this is what I'm expecting, and we make those expectations recurrent, in today's Zoom session, this is what I'm excited about. I'm excited to see you contribute. I'm excited to see you faces. I'm excited to see the pets come in to your screen, or the kids come into your background, and kind of let them know that each time. And I think most people are going to play the way we want them to play. I don't think as many people are going to try to game us. And the ones that do, as we've mentioned, they're going to do it, and there's not much we can do to stop them. But I think most people are trying their best. And if we give them guidance about how to be their best selves in our classes, they're going to try to approximate that. And that's going to make me feel happier as an instructor, and is going to hopefully help them learn more as students.
So Kristen had asked whether it's better to use the waiting room or a password for large groups. I would definitely go for the password and give them the link that has the password embedded in it, right? The original Zoom bombing issues that we were having were that those meetings were out there publicly, right? Or that there was this short string of numbers that someone could randomly type in and get into a Zoom session that they had no connection to whatsoever and do very inappropriate things. So if you provide that Zoom link that has the password embedded, then they don't have to enter any password. They don't have to do anything extra. It just connects them to the meeting. So I think that really works well. The waiting room, I personally have found to be quite difficult to manage, right? You admit someone, and then there's another person, and then there's another person. So the larger your group, the more you're trying to admit people from the waiting room. And then if you have that chime that is going off every time someone joins the meeting, I mean, it just gets kind of chaotic and frustrating to have someone sitting there. Now, the waiting room is really valuable, though, if you're using a common Zoom link for office hours, where you want to just be working with one student, and then other students, may be coming in later, but you're going to admit them one at a time. That's where the waiting room can work well.
Waiting room also works if you have either a GTA or someone who's manning that by itself. We've had several faculty meetings where our assistant dean or someone else will manage the waiting room where the faculty is talking, and that makes for a smoother transition where you don't have to be concerned with it if you're the host. And I've found that to work very well. I don't like the waiting room because I don't like the wait, but that's a whole nother matter.
So Kristen, there's a way to, and Trina and I will find the link. Trina's been doing a better job of finding the links, but there's a way to have it set when you set the password, it then produces a longer link. So it's I don't know, what is it, 10, 11 digit Zoom link, but then it's an extended random series of characters. So your URL is actually quite long and there's really no duplication to it. So I think that's just a setting that we have to work into your Zoom process.
Looks like that's pretty much the default anymore, but
Is
I'll
it?
put that
Okay.
out there.
Thank you.
Yes, agreed. That's the default. We had a choice with the security features that they released on how to default meeting setups for the K-State tenant, and we chose to default to the password over waiting room for the exact reasons that were just described. There is plenty of value in the waiting room, as many of you have described, but given a default choice for everyone, we went with the password. You can still use the waiting room, etc., of course.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up on the chat too
know.
while we're talking, and I love some of these ideas. Somebody talked about putting a favorite quote from a reading in the chat. Somebody else talked about what was it called, a waterfall where everybody types but nobody hits enter, and then the instructor tells them when to hit enter, so everybody's comments are going in at the same time. So people aren't kind of waiting to add on or seeing, you know, kind of building on others. That's a great idea.
That's interesting. Yeah. And you know, using, and I know Sue's so great with all the additional tools, using, you know, Padlet or something like that for them to post all of their comments and all of those stay together. It can be a really good way, and then they can build on each other's comments. And so it can kind of stay in a more conversational pattern, whereas this, where we're, you know, we're kind of jumping around, we're having a hard time tracking all of the different awesome questions and comments that people have put in the chat. You know, using an external tool could allow you to organize that in a slightly different way, create some topics to start with and have them start adding underneath those and that kind of thing. I've seen a couple of great comments on, you know, good conversation about how to organize the instructions. Andy's point about having a student repeat them. We've also seen lots of advice about using some sort of shared document that all of the breakout rooms have to use to kind of show their progress as they're communicating. They're supposed to be posting in that shared document. So you don't have to be trying to jump around and eavesdrop on any of those breakout rooms. I don't know if you're all aware, but make sure you've updated your Zoom I think it was last month, might have been end of November. Zoom now has a feature where students can choose which breakout room they go to. You can preset them so that they go into specific breakout rooms because you want 5 random students in each group or whatever. But you could also create breakout rooms by topic, and then they can choose which breakout room they want to go to and work from there. So it's an interesting new feature. And then they have the ability to leave one breakout room and go into another one as well. So it gives a little bit more flexibility. Okay, we can stop talking about Zoom. What other things?
I'm gonna bring up one other thing that I found fun to do. And this isn't an attendance thing, it's just seeing if they remember from one class period to the next. I'll say, we will all put up a photo in place of our photo of our pet, and we'll talk about them. Because I'll come on earlier than the class, and I'll have these conversations with students, and we'll talk about something personal. And I'll say, okay, next time we're all going to put our pets up and talk about our pets. And it was very interesting to see that most of my class had cats and dogs, but I had one young lady that put her horse up. And so in the morning, if she came on early, we would talk about that. So it gave me a way to connect with my students in a very interesting, personal way without them, so to speak, feeling like I'm bombarding them, but it was a topic that they were interested in talking about. And then at the end of the semester, I do an exit interview with them, and I'll ask them what are they going to do. I'll give them good advice about things they could do. But we end up talking about the pets again, because sometimes they'd show up on the screen, as you've suggested, but other times they wouldn't. And then another week later, I might say, well, you all have been developing a concept for your project. Put a photograph of that concept that represents that concept up on the board. And we're going to leave that up, and you're going to talk about it in class, but it'll stay up through that project. So it gives the class a chance to see different images, and the reviewers for their projects to come back and see these interesting, very diverse imageries of concepts that these students are going to be talking about in their projects. So I'm using it as a visual way as well to see, are they paying attention to what I asked them to do the class before? And the ones that didn't will not have put up something, or they'll say, oh, I'm having difficulty figuring out how to get that up as a background or as an image. So then we talk about how to do that, especially for freshmen. So it's been helpful in a lot of different ways to do something fun at the same time than to see their faces every class period. You know? So those are fun things that you can do with them, especially if they're coming in early into your Zoom.
I love the idea of, incorporating visual elements more. There's, ways to use Zoom for that. There's ways also to do like concept mapping. There's some apps out there where you can do a lot with that. It's a lot of fun. And it also helps students make those connections. And sometimes I think as instructors, then the connections are in your head, but maybe you can do more to communicate all those connections or show those connections to your students, because they are not just automatically picking them up the way you are, since you know the content area so well. So concept mapping is a great way to pull all of those things in throughout the semester together.
I think it also gives a way to see if they understood something, a concept or some information that you sent them or gave them the last class period, and you get to see, image whether they got it. That's one thing. And then the other way that I use it is that I found a bunch of inspirational quotes, and if they're in a stressful week, I'll put that quote up behind me as a way to send that message to them to be encouraged and to keep working. And they're all different kinds of encouragement notes. And even my department head said, oh, I really like that one. Where did that one go? You had that up last week. And so it's really a great way to communicate in a silent way, but to give your students a way of seeing that you care about where they are at this moment, if they're stressed or they're struggling with finishing a project, and to acknowledge that you get it. So another visual. And it also keeps you down from seeing your private environment, which you will never see of mine. Okay.
And I absolutely appreciate that. One of the things I'm going to pivot the discussion a little bit to something that Melissa asked in the chat about, what do you do in your teaching to encourage metacognition for our students? I mean, I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of people do pretty well is they share information well with their students, but get their students to do something wonderful with that information or metacognitively to think about their thinking and what they're doing, I think is harder. The simple answer I gave to this question in the chat is I ask why all the time. It's not enough to know what the answer is. You got to know why that's the answer. Or in a lot of the classes that I teach, there's not a right answer. So what is your decision, and then why have you made that decision? And is it plausible that you made, an easy, lazy decision rather than the best decision? And if so, let's tweak that. But I am interested, as I think Melissa is too, how do we encourage metacognition for our students? These kind of deeper levels of learning, these applications of their learning, their investment in the personal part of that learning process.
In my classes, I always have students, for whatever the assignment is, always part of the assignment is what are the real life applications of this knowledge. And I think that that helps a lot. I don't give a lot of exams, but when I do give exams, like that's really part of it, because I don't want to see that you've memorized something. I don't really care that you fully have down what everything is called and that you have the terminology perfect. Like I care much less about that than like understanding the concepts. And so, where is this? How do you see this playing out in real life? What are its consequences? And that always I find, one, it's way more interesting to grade, like phenomenally, like grading exams where students are saying like, oh, like they come up with stuff that like I never thought of, that I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, especially because they're coming from different backgrounds. You have students who are business majors or psychology majors, and so they're coming from different backgrounds and bringing that perspective to whatever my course content is. And so that's my favorite thing to do. And all of my assignments and exams have that aspect to it.
One of the recommendations I was going to make next week is basically all your assignments should be things your students should want to do and you should want to get back from them. If they're not, then you're going to have some of the trouble we've already talked about. They're less likely to cheat on an assignment that they find valuable, I would think. So I really like that aspect to it. I like to ask my students, what's the most surprising thing you learned today? What's the thing that you had to think about that didn't make sense at first? What's the thing that went contrary to your preconceptions? Because it really kind of gets at this notion that, in terms of the growth mindset, we're learning. And I think learning by definition means we're changed. So, what changed for you in this class? What changed your thinking from where it was? What did you add? What did you tweak? And I think students doing that, it might not be appropriate at the end of a class. They might need time to incubate with the idea. But I think using that as a periodic thing, an expectation in my class, because students in my classes weekly have to tell me what surprised you. And it's amazing because some of the things that surprise them is something I may have known for decades. And I might not be empathetic to the point that, hey, that once was surprising. That was once something that I didn't know. And that really helps me empathize with their experience too.
I think Barbara's point is great, that we do need to teach them to think about their thinking. I think too much of high school has become memorize, and you need to get the correct answer and all of that. And they don't necessarily know even what they're supposed to do to actually think about it. So definitely the application ideas that Andy has, that, think about it in the real life context and how it affects them, is so important.
The other thing that I often do, so I always have students, I give them like a preparation guide that they have to complete with whatever reading they're doing before coming to class. And I've started adding at the end of that, I've always done kind of like reflection questions, but I've started adding a few more questions about how long they spent on that assignment, which is useful for them. How much time did you spend and how much effort did you put in? So that they're aware that like, oh yeah, like I probably am not getting this very well because I didn't put in a lot of effort. Or they'll say that they put in a lot of effort and they really struggled. And that gives me important feedback of like, okay, what are they struggling with? What are they having an easy time with? And it makes them more aware of how they could more efficiently use their time, what they can do to improve. So I think that adding those kinds of, carving out space in class or in your assignments to kind of have them think about how much time are they spending, how much effort are they putting in, how challenging was it for them to grasp the concepts. Those kinds of questions can really help them to think about how they're learning.
I was just going to say, I love these ideas. And besides the challenging aspects to your students and connecting them with the material and everything, it's got to give you as instructors so much helpful feedback, because those kinds of answers give you so much more to go off of. If somebody's way off base and why, what is not connecting with them. So it's got to help you immensely to have that kind of feedback coming from them.
I was going to say the other thing that I try to do is mix the obvious answers with ones that aren't, there is no true or false or yes or no. For instance, I will usually on my films ask them, which character do you identify with and why? So it forces them as they watch the film to, or afterwards, to think about, do I take that position or not? And why do I take that position? Which also searches them to have to think about that. But it means they have to watch the whole film. They can't go to sleep on it because there's some turn in it that may change the character a bit, that forces them to say, well, it was when this person did this that I remember as a kid, I did that. So, you know, those things are also important, I think. And you can do that whether it's read or film, a book. If they're reading a book, that can also happen, to ask them to identify a concept or something in the book or in the film or in the music that they relate to and why they relate to that. So I've been really thinking about also the application piece, because we're teaching a course called Planning in Pop Culture. So the question is, as a planner, if you're going to be a planner, how would you resolve that situation yourself in the movie? Or the recent one I asked is on transportation. And I said, if this is a film done in 1945, and we have other forms of transportation today, and you could be a sequel, you could write a sequel to this film, what form of transportation would you use for that outcome? So it forces them to think about, well, what's going on today in transportation? What kinds of transportation forms are we using today? How would we create that in a film that was a remake of that 1945 film? So I want them to be creative, but then thoughtful about the circumstances of today. And that's one of the ways that I do that. Who's got music?
Sorry, my phone. I was just typing in here, but I think I'll just say it that Eva was putting something in here about video instead of a paper, and the maximum or the minimum amount of time that would equate to a 4-page paper. And I was going to steal an idea that Dawn has thrown out there several times to give that maximum instead of a minimum, both for her purposes, so you're not looking at 10, 20-minute videos. But it also made me think about Laura and I's experience. So we've been trying to put together these 3-minute videos on Thursday, and to pack something, any topic, into 3 minutes, man, it makes you really think, what is the most important thing we've got to get across here? So anyway, I was just going to kind of throw that out there. Sorry, I'm jumping around. I'm reading the chat. I'm listening. I'm trying to get to everything.
So I'll add to the point there about giving them. I love giving them choice. I love giving them the opportunity to write or to do the video. In my experience, they would rather write the paper. It's safer. The videos are vulnerable. And a lot of students kind of get stuck down a rabbit hole doing the video editing and the production and things like that. And I'll implore my students, I just want something personal. One of the things I have my students do in my classes, I have the new PSAs, these public service announcements about the things that they've learned in the class. So it'd be like, I just want 1 to 2 minutes or 1 to 200 words about the biggest thing that you would kind of promote from this class as an idea moving forward. And best, and I've been doing this for a couple semesters, even before the pandemic, best I've seen is about 1/3 of the students doing the videos. It's just safer for them. It's less vulnerable for them to do the writing. The videos are so much more interesting as an instructor to see and to grade. You see the personality and authenticity there. But I would say that if you're going to do these kinds of things, just be aware that your students are going to take the safest, easiest option sometimes because of good reasons, right? If I'm a student and I have a lot of things going on, I'm going to take the easier option to demonstrate my learning because I have too many other things going on. Or I'm going to take the option I'm more familiar with. So just don't be disappointed, or at least too disappointed, when the innovative choice you provide isn't the one they pick. You will be heartened by the few that do it, but in my experience, not that many are going to do it because it's hard for a lot of reasons.
That's a great point, Dawn. And also think about, opening up sort of an open option way, right? They could write a paper, they could do a film, but if they have another idea, as long as you've got that rubric that really outlines what the goals are, what the point is, what it is they're supposed to be accomplishing, if they come up with a different creative way to do that, write a comic strip or whatever their passion happens to be, as long as it's addressing those rubric areas, maybe that would work for you.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Would you
I
stop?
would say if you're going to do something with the wildcard option, I would recommend having, and someone has said about like having a check-in beforehand. Kind of, this
Oh,
is
absolutely. They
Oh,
need your
yeah.
permission before they can
Yeah.
proceed.
Yeah,
Okay.
we had a student recently in a class that I taught do a wonderfully creative thing that really didn't demonstrate any of the learning outcomes that we had. And it was very awkward because the student probably put in 3 times more work than any other student in the class. It just didn't fit our parameters at all. And what made it a little bit hard is we did have this check-in, and the student assumed that our critique was a suggestion, not a mandate. And that created a very uncomfortable situation later. It's like, yes, you did an extraordinary amount of work, but it didn't demonstrate that you learned anything in our class. So I think kind of having the wild card is great. Most students in my experience won't pick the wild card, but a
Yeah.
few will and do really cool things with it. But having that check-in and then being maybe more firm than we were, kind of in that critique, to make sure that they knew that, hey, this isn't going to work as you stated.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
I do want to bring up another outlet that we so often don't think about, and we used to use this one, is that we have a radio station. And there are very, very few universities who still have them. And when we would ask for our students at the end of our pop culture class to produce another piece of pop culture, that was one of the things they had to do. They had to do a 2-hour radio show. And then they could have all their friends come and listen to their radio show, and they would play it over and over again. We've now moved to YouTube videos, which, and we've decided, well, because it's difficult during break to get the personnel for the student run station to be available to help them with editing. But at the same time, the wild card for us, if we say they all have to do them this year, was to say some could do it in a group. Because of COVID, they might not want to. They could do it as an individual or in pairs or any combination that they wanted to do. So what they would do is pick people, 1 or 2 people who were familiar with the software, for instance, to be able to do the editing, whereas someone else might have been very comfortable being the narrator, and somebody else might want to be the researcher and find the material. So we let them sort of rely on their strength, if you will, or that comfortable level to produce the films that they were doing. And so we decided that we wouldn't go back to the radio show because it's a crapshoot as to hold your breath whether you can even get it done. And we just do films now. And those are really interesting for us because some of them have taken a very serious position on things like, sexuality or an issue that involved women in situations of distress. And yet we've also had simple subjects that they've covered in terms of city planning in a very broad way, or deterioration or hazardous waste. So you get a chance to see what they're really interested in because they get to choose the subjects. And we only ask that they put the components from class, at least 1 film, 1 song, and 1 art piece in the video. So then they choose what they liked or what might relate to their theme. So it gives us a chance to see how they're using this material that they've had to look at over the 3 weeks. And that's a great way. And they've been very, very successful, which we're pleased about. So it's fun too. It's fun to watch them. and then to share them either conversation on discussion boards or in person.
I love that idea. I love the creativity there. I love that you're allowing to demonstrate their learning. And I love how wonderful it is as an instructor to see that work come back. Amazingly, we're about out of time. So I wanna end by sharing my screen and showing you the events that we have coming up, just to remind everybody that this is not the last time that we will get to talk. So as you can see, today we had our teaching chat. Next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, we'll have kind of our first regular Wednesday slot for the semester. I'll be talking about encouraging empathy in your course design and policies. Some of the points that I've made today, I'll make then with a little bit more detail. Next Thursday, a week from this coming Thursday, we'll have our second teaching chat. On Wednesday, January 20th, we'll have another teaching chat where you can have questions and share ideas and learn from each other. And then once the semester is started, that first Wednesday of the semester, Barbara Wigfall, LB, we'll be talking about maintaining your and your students' mind, body, and spirit. All of these will be at noon. All of these will be using the same Zoom link that you used today to get to this event. And I'll remind you something I said earlier is that we don't have to make it all up. We have a lot of people on campus who are dedicated to the experiences of instructors and students. So coming to these meetings, reaching out to us at the TLC, reaching out to the instructional designers at Global Campus, we want to create good experiences, not only for your students, but also for you. So please come to the events and share your ideas and your questions. And we're going to have a wonderful spring semester. So I'll stick around.